Virginia Jensen clutched the frayed edges of her favorite blue gingham dress as her husband, Thomas, threw another one of her handmade garments into the burning hearth, the flames licking hungrily at the fabric that had taken her weeks to stitch. It was 1869 in Murphy's, California, and Virginia was watching the life she thought she knew disappear into smoke and ash. "I've told you time and again, Virginia. A banker's wife does not dress like some farmer's daughter." Thomas seethed, his normally composed demeanor cracking under what he called the burden of her impropriety. Virginia swallowed hard, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. She'd been born and raised on a ranch outside town, the daughter of a cattle rancher who taught her to ride horses, mend fences, and shoot straight. Those were the things she knew, the things that made her who she was. But Thomas had different ideas about who his wife should be. "Thomas, please," she whispered, reaching for a patchwork quilt her mother had made for her before she passed. "That was my mother's." Thomas yanked it from her grasp. "Your mother was a simple woman, Virginia. I married you despite your upbringing because I saw potential. It's time you realized what an opportunity you've been given." Virginia stood frozen in their bedroom, surrounded by the fine furnishings Thomas had ordered from San Francisco. 6 months of marriage had taught her that the charming banker who'd courted her had only been interested in molding her into something she wasn't. "Tomorrow, Mrs. Hargrove will begin your proper etiquette lessons," Thomas continued, smoothing down his vest. "And I've ordered new dresses from San Francisco, ones befitting your position. The Ladies' Society meets on Thursdays and you'll be joining them from now on." He glanced disapprovingly at her calloused hands. "And for God's sake, wear your gloves. Your hands look like you've been digging ditches." After Thomas left for the bank that morning, Virginia sat at her dressing table, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized herself already. Thomas had insisted she pin her long chestnut hair in tight coils at the nape of her neck, rather than the simple braid she'd always worn. The high-necked, restrictive dresses he purchased pinched and squeezed her until she could hardly breathe. She thought back to her father's ranch, now being run by her older brother. The freedom she'd had, the purpose she'd felt. Thomas wanted her to be ornamental, a perfect banker's wife who spoke softly, played piano, and hosted tea parties. He wanted her to forget how to saddle a horse or the joy of feeling spring rain on her face without worrying about ruining a bonnet. Virginia wiped away a tear and made a decision. She wouldn't go to Mrs. Hargrove's today. Instead, she changed into her last remaining simple dress that Thomas hadn't found, covered it with a cloak, and slipped out the back door of their grand house on Oak Street. The familiar sights and sounds of Murphy's greeted her as she walked briskly through town. The mining community had grown prosperous since gold was discovered in the nearby hills 20 years prior. Now it boasted a main street lined with buildings made of sturdy brick rather than the rough-hewn timber of its early days. Virginia kept her head down, not wanting to be recognized by any of Thomas's associates or their wives. She needed to breathe, to think. Her feet carried her to McCoy's General Store, where she'd spent happy hours as a child while her father traded and purchased supplies. Well, if it isn't Virginia Jensen, or I suppose it's Mrs. Thomas Worthington now, isn't it? Old Mr. McCoy's weathered face broke into a warm smile when she entered the store. "Just Virginia, please," she replied softly, removing her hood. "Haven't seen much of you since the wedding. Your husband keeping you busy with society affairs?" he asked, organizing a display of canned goods. Virginia forced a smile. Something like that. The bell over the door jingled, and Virginia instinctively stepped back into the shadow of a tall shelf. She wasn't ready to make conversation with anyone who might report back to Thomas. A tall man ducked through the doorway, removing his hat as he entered. Dust covered his worn denim pants and faded blue shirt. The spurs on his boots clinked softly against the wooden floor as he approached the counter. "Mr. McCoy," the stranger nodded. "Got those supplies ready for the Jensen ranch. Jack's expecting them by sundown." Virginia's ears perked up at the mention of her brother's name. The stranger must be working for her family. "Just finishing gathering them now, Mr. Keegan," McCoy replied. "You're new to these parts, aren't you?" "Jake Keegan," the man replied. "Been working at the Jensen place for about 3 months now. Came west from Colorado." Virginia couldn't help but study him. He stood tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and strong, tanned hands that spoke of years of hard work. His hair was the color of wheat under his hat, and when he turned slightly, she caught sight of eyes as blue as a summer sky. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the short beard that covered his face. She must have been staring because suddenly those blue eyes were looking directly at her. Recognition flickered in them. "Miss Virginia?" he asked, his deep voice carrying across the store. Virginia stepped forward, embarrassed to be caught hiding. "Yes, though it's Mrs. Worthington now." Jake smiled and small lines crinkled around his eyes. "I know. Your brother speaks of you often. I've seen your portrait in his house." "You work for Jack?" she asked, moving closer to the counter. "Foreman now," he replied. "After Bill Matthews retired last month." Virginia felt a pang of homesickness. Bill had been her father's foreman for as long as she could remember. "I didn't know Bill retired." Jake studied her face for a moment. "Your brother mentioned he sent you a letter about it, Thomas." Virginia realized with a sinking feeling that Thomas must have intercepted the letter. He'd made it clear he wanted her to distance herself from her rustic past. "I must have missed it," she said quietly. Mr. McCoy cleared his throat. "Got those supplies ready, Mr. Keegan?" "Need help loading the wagon?" "I can manage," Jake replied, then turned back to Virginia. "Would you like me to tell your brother you said hello?" Virginia hesitated, glancing toward the door. Thomas would be furious if he knew she was here, talking to a ranch hand. But this was a connection to her family, to her real life. "Yes, please," she finally said. "Tell him I miss him." Jake nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "Will do, Mrs. Worthington." "Virginia," she corrected him. "Please, just Virginia." "Virginia," he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his voice made her heart flutter unexpectedly. As Jake loaded supplies onto his wagon outside, Virginia made a small purchase, some peppermint sticks, that reminded her of childhood visits to the store with her father. When she stepped outside, Jake was securing the last of the supplies. "Heading back to the ranch?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Jake nodded. "Need to get these supplies back before sundown." Virginia looked down the street toward her house, the grand 2-story structure that felt more like a prison than a home. Would it be possible? She started, then faltered. "What is it?" Jake asked, his expression open and kind. "Would it be possible to visit the ranch sometime?" "I miss it terribly." The words came out in a rush before she could reconsider. Jake studied her for a moment. "I reckon your brother would be mighty happy to see you. You're always welcome there, from what he tells me." Virginia sighed. "My husband doesn't approve of my spending time at the ranch. He says it's unbecoming." Something flashed in Jake's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or anger on her behalf. "With all due respect, madam, I don't see how visiting your family could be unbecoming. Thomas has certain ideas about how a banker's wife should behave," she said quietly. Jake's jaw tightened slightly. "Well, if you ever need to get a message to your brother, you can find me in town most Saturdays picking up supplies." Virginia felt a small spark of hope. "Thank you, Mr. Keegan." "Jake," he corrected with a small smile. "Just Jake." As Jake climbed onto the wagon and tipped his hat to her, Virginia felt lighter than she had in months. That brief conversation with someone who didn't look at her like she needed fixing had been like a breath of fresh air. But reality returned quickly when she heard the town clock strike noon. Thomas would be expecting her home for lunch, and if he discovered she'd missed her appointment with Mrs. Hargrove, there would be consequences. Virginia hurried back to the house, slipping in through the kitchen door. She barely had time to change back into one of Thomas's approved dresses before he arrived home. "How was your lesson?" Thomas asked as they sat down to lunch, their housekeeper Martha serving soup. Virginia stared at her bowl. "Enlightening. Excellent, Mrs. Hargrove is the finest instructor of etiquette in the county. By the time she's finished with you, no one will remember you were raised running wild on that ranch." He smiled as if he'd paid her a compliment. Virginia's hand tightened around her spoon. "Thomas, I was thinking I might visit my brother soon. It's been months since—" "Out of the question," Thomas cut her off sharply. "We've discussed this, Virginia. Association with that lifestyle will only hinder your progress. Besides, I've invited the bank investors and their wives for dinner next Friday. You'll need to prepare." Virginia fell silent, pushing her soup around the bowl. "I've also scheduled an appointment with the dressmaker tomorrow," Thomas continued. "That hair of yours needs attention as well. Perhaps Mrs. Hargrove can recommend someone who can style it properly." Each word felt like another piece of herself being chipped away. Thomas wanted to remake her entirely: her clothes, her hair, the way she spoke, even the people she associated with. The worst part was that he truly believed he was doing her a favor, elevating her from her humble beginnings. That night, as Thomas slept beside her, Virginia lay awake, thinking of the ranch, of Jake Keegan's kind eyes, and of the life she'd left behind. She'd married Thomas believing she was in love, dazzled by his worldliness and charm. Now she wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Virginia made an excuse to Thomas about needing special thread from McCoy's store, and he'd allowed her to go. Pleased that she was taking an interest in proper womanly pursuits like embroidery, her heart raced as she approached the general store, hoping Jake would be there as he'd mentioned. Relief flooded through her when she spotted his wagon outside. Inside, she found him examining a new saddle. He looked up when she entered and his face brightened. "Virginia," he said, setting down the leather he'd been inspecting. "Good to see you again." "You as well, Jake," she replied, surprised by how natural it felt to use his first name. "Your brother was pleased to hear you asked after him," Jake said, moving closer. "Asked me to give you this if I saw you again." He handed her a letter, carefully folded and sealed. Virginia clutched it gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered, tucking it into her pocket before anyone could see. Jake's expression turned serious. "Is everything all right, Virginia? Jack seemed worried when I mentioned seeing you in town." Virginia glanced around the store, making sure no one was within earshot. "Things are difficult. Thomas has certain expectations that are proving challenging to meet." Jake's brow furrowed. "What kind of expectations?" "He wants to change me," she admitted, the words feeling both terrifying and freeing to say aloud. "My clothes, my speech, my interests, everything that makes me who I am." Jake's jaw tightened. "That doesn't seem right." "It's what I agreed to when I married him," Virginia said, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. "Did you?" Jake asked gently. "Did you agree to become someone else entirely?" Virginia looked up at him, struck by the directness of his question. No one had asked her that before. Everyone in town seemed to think it perfectly natural that Thomas would want to improve his rural-raised wife. "I thought marriage was about partnership," she finally said, "but Thomas sees it more as ownership." Jake looked like he wanted to say more but held back. Instead, he asked, "Do you ride still? Horses, I mean." The question caught Virginia off guard. "No, Thomas says it's unladylike." A flicker of something anger perhaps crossed Jake's face. "That's a shame. You were known as one of the finest riders in the county, according to your brother." Pride swelled in Virginia's chest at the compliment. "I miss it. The freedom of it." Jake glanced out the window at his wagon. "I have to head back to the ranch now, but I'll be in town again next Saturday." He hesitated, then added, "Your brother mentioned he'd like to see you. If you wanted to visit the ranch, I could help arrange it." The offer hung between them, dangerous and tempting. "I don't know if I can," Virginia said, though everything in her wanted to say yes. "The offer stands," Jake said simply. "Whatever you decide." As Jake left the store, Virginia felt torn between the life she was expected to live and the one her heart longed for. She opened her brother's letter when she returned home, hiding in the garden where Thomas wouldn't see her. Jack's familiar handwriting brought tears to her eyes. He wrote of the ranch, of the new foal born to her favorite mare, of how much he missed her. At the end, he wrote, "Sis, Jake mentioned something that worries me. Are you truly happy? Father always said you should never let anyone dim your spirit. If you need anything at all, you know where to find me." Virginia wiped away tears, carefully folding the letter and hiding it beneath a loose floorboard in her dressing room. That night at dinner, Thomas noticed her red-rimmed eyes. "Have you been crying?" he asked, more annoyed than concerned. "Just a touch of hay fever," she lied. Thomas frowned. "Well, control yourself. The Millers are coming for tea tomorrow, and I won't have you looking a mess." Virginia nodded obediently, but something inside her had begun to shift. The quiet acceptance she'd forced upon herself these past months was giving way to something else, a slow, burning rebellion. The following week passed in a blur of forced smiles and endless lessons. Mrs. Hargrove tutted over Virginia's posture, her accent, the way she held her teacup. The dressmaker pulled her corset so tight she could barely breathe, while Thomas beamed with approval at her new silhouette. "You're making progress," he told her one evening, as if she were a project nearing completion. "Mrs. Miller commented on how refined you're becoming." Virginia said nothing, thinking instead of Saturday, of possibly seeing Jake again, of her brother's letter and the connection to her true self it represented. When Saturday arrived, Virginia told Thomas she needed to visit the milliner to order a new hat for church. He approved, pleased by this display of social awareness. At McCoy's store, Jake was examining a new rope. His face lit up when she entered, and Virginia felt a warmth spread through her chest at his genuine smile. "You came," he said simply. "I did," she replied. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jake said, his voice low as he moved closer. "About your husband wanting to change you." Virginia tensed, suddenly afraid she'd revealed too much to this man she barely knew. "I don't mean to overstep," Jake continued, sensing her discomfort. "It's just that. I've only been in Murphy's a few months, but I heard stories about Virginia Jensen long before I met you." "Stories?" she asked, curious despite herself. "About the rancher's daughter who could outride any man in the county, who helped deliver calves and mend fences, who shot a rattlesnake threatening her brother when she was just 14. Jake's eyes were warm with admiration. "Those stories don't sound like someone who needs changing." Virginia felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thomas doesn't value those things." "Then he's a fool," Jake said, the words escaping before he could stop them. He immediately looked contrite. "I apologize. That was inappropriate." But Virginia wasn't offended. In fact, something in her heart responded to his candor. "Sometimes I think the same thing," she admitted in a whisper. Their conversation was interrupted when Mrs. Potter, the banker's wife's closest friend, entered the store. Virginia quickly stepped away from Jake, pretending to examine a bolt of fabric. Mrs. Potter's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Virginia, what a surprise to see you here, and speaking with one of your brother's ranch hands, wasn't it?" The disapproval in her voice was unmistakable. "Mr. Keegan was just telling me about a new foal born at the ranch," Virginia said, keeping her voice steady. "Indeed." Mrs. Potter's thin lips pressed together. "Well, I'm sure Thomas would be interested to hear about your agricultural discussions." The threat was thinly veiled. Virginia knew that by afternoon, Thomas would hear about this encounter, embellished to sound as scandalous as possible. As Mrs. Potter moved to the other side of the store, Jake murmured, "I'm sorry if I've caused trouble for you." "It's not your fault," Virginia replied softly. "I should go." Jake nodded, understanding. "The offer to visit the ranch still stands. Your brother's expecting a delivery of new stock next Tuesday. I'll be handling it alone. No other hands will be there in the north pasture." Virginia understood what he wasn't saying explicitly. It would be a chance to visit without witnesses who might report back to Thomas. It was dangerous, reckless even, but the thought of seeing the ranch again, of breathing freely for even a few hours, was irresistible. "I'll think about it," she promised, though in her heart she'd already decided. As expected, Thomas confronted her that evening, his face dark with anger. "Mrs. Potter tells me she saw you having an intimate conversation with some cowboy at McCoy's today," he said as soon as they were alone. Virginia kept her voice calm. "Hardly intimate, Thomas. He works for my brother and was simply passing on news of the ranch." "I've told you repeatedly that association with that life is behind you now," Thomas snapped. "Do you have any idea how it looks for my wife to be gossiping with ranch hands in public?" "He's the foreman," Virginia corrected, immediately regretting the defiance in her tone. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "I don't care if he's the King of England. You are my wife, and you will conduct yourself accordingly." He paced the room, running a hand through his perfectly combed hair. "I've been too lenient. From now on, Martha will accompany you whenever you leave the house." Virginia felt the walls closing in. "Thomas, that's not necessary. It clearly is," he interrupted. "I've worked too hard building our reputation in this town to have you ruin it by reverting to your old ways." "My old ways?" Virginia repeated, anger finally breaking through her careful composure. "You mean the person I was when you married me?" Thomas looked at her as if she were a child who didn't understand a simple concept. "I married you for your potential, Virginia, not for what you were." The words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. Virginia realized with startling clarity that Thomas had never loved her at all, only the idea of what he could make her become. That night, she made her decision. On Tuesday, while Thomas was at the bank and Martha was busy with the laundry, Virginia slipped out the back door wearing her simplest dress. She walked quickly through town, taking back alleys to avoid being seen, until she reached the edge of Murphy's. There, she followed the old familiar trail toward her family's ranch. It was a long walk, nearly 4 miles, but Virginia relished every step. The sun on her face, the scent of pine and sage in the air, these simple pleasures had been denied her for too long. By the time she reached the northern pasture boundary of the Jensen ranch, her feet were sore but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. Jake was there, as promised, inspecting a line of fence near where the new cattle would be delivered. His face registered surprise and then pleasure when he spotted her approaching. "You came," he said, echoing their exchange from the store. "I needed to," Virginia replied simply. Jake offered her a drink from his canteen. "Your brother's at the main house. Would you like me to take you to him?" Virginia hesitated. "Not yet. I just wanted to be here first, to remember." Jake seemed to understand. He gestured to a nearby gentle slope that overlooked the pastures and distant mountains. Best view on the property, according to your brother. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Virginia drinking in the familiar landscape. Eventually, she spoke. Thomas has forbidden me from leaving the house alone now. Jake's expression darkened. Because of our conversation at the store, Virginia nodded. Mrs. Potter wasted no time reporting it. I'm sorry, Jake said, genuine regret in his voice. Don't be. It would have happened eventually. Thomas is determined to erase everything about me that doesn't fit his ideal. Jake picked up a piece of grass, twirling it between his fingers. Why did you marry him, if you don't mind my asking? It was a bold question, but Virginia found she didn't mind. He was charming, sophisticated. Everything about him seemed so certain, so secure. After my father died, the ranch was struggling, I thought. She trailed off, embarrassed. You thought you were doing what was best for everyone, Jake finished for her. Virginia nodded, surprised by his understanding. I didn't realize the price would be so high. Jake was quiet for a moment. You know, when I first came to work here, your brother showed me a photograph of you. You were sitting on a horse, hair flying in the wind, laughing. He told me his sister was the bravest, most determined person he knew. Jake looked at her directly. I see that person still, Virginia. Whatever your husband might say or do, he hasn't erased her. Virginia felt tears prick her eyes. Sometimes I'm not sure she exists anymore. She does, Jake said firmly. She's right here, risking her husband's anger to return to a place that matters to her. That takes courage. Virginia wiped away a tear, embarrassed. I should go see Jack before I lose my nerve. Jake stood, offering his hand to help her up. The simple touch sent a strange flutter through Virginia's chest, one she quickly tried to dismiss. The reunion with her brother was emotional. Jack Jensen engulfed her in a bear hug the moment he saw her, lifting her clear off the ground. He was 32, 4 years her senior, with the same chestnut hair and green eyes as Virginia. Good Lord, Ginny, let me look at you, he said, setting her down and holding her at arm's length. You're too thin. Isn't that fancy husband of yours feeding you? I'm fine, Jack, she assured him, though the use of her childhood nickname brought fresh tears. Like hell you are, Jack replied, his expression serious. Jake's been keeping me informed. Sounds like that banker's making your life miserable. Virginia cast a surprised glance at Jake, who looked slightly uncomfortable. I may have mentioned my concerns to your brother, he admitted, after our first meeting in town. We're worried about you, Ginny, Jack said. This isn't right, what he's doing. Virginia sank into a chair in the familiar ranch house kitchen. I made my choice when I married him, Jack. You didn't choose to be imprisoned, Jack argued, and from what Jake tells me, that's exactly what's happening. Virginia couldn't deny it. He says he's improving me. There wasn't a damned thing wrong with you to begin with, Jack said fiercely. From the doorway, Jake spoke quietly. That's what I told her too. Virginia looked between the two men, touched by their concern but also aware of the impossible situation she was in. I can't just leave him. A divorce would be scandalous, and where would I go? What would I do? You'd come home, Jack said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. This place is as much yours as mine, always has been. Virginia shook her head. Thomas would never allow it. He'd make things difficult for you for the ranch. Let him try, Jack said grimly. They spent the afternoon talking, catching up on all she'd missed. Virginia found herself laughing for the first time in months at Jack's stories about the ranch hand's antics. Jake remained mostly quiet, but his presence was a steady, comforting force in the room. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Virginia reluctantly rose to leave. I need to get back before Thomas returns home. I'll drive you, Jake offered immediately. No, Virginia protested. If anyone sees us together, it will only make things worse. Then I'll take you as far as the edge of town, Jake compromised. It's too far to walk, and your brother would have my hide if I let you try. Jack nodded in agreement. He's right, Jenny. Let him drive you. The wagon ride back was quiet, both Virginia and Jake lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the outskirts of Murphy's, Jake finally broke the silence. "What will you do now?" he asked. Virginia sighed. "Go home. Pretend to be the wife Thomas wants. And is that what you want?" Jake's blue eyes were intent on her face. "What I want doesn't seem to matter anymore," she replied. Jake pulled the wagon to a stop. "It matters to me," he said softly. Virginia's heart skipped a beat at the sincerity in his voice. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she was free to be herself, where someone valued her for exactly who she was. "Thank you for today," she said instead of acknowledging his words, "for helping me visit the ranch." Jake nodded, understanding her reluctance to say more. "If you need anything at all, send word to the ranch. I'll find a way to help." Virginia climbed down from the wagon, already dreading returning to her gilded cage. "Goodbye, Jake." "This isn't goodbye, Virginia," he replied with quiet certainty. "I'll see you again." Something in his tone made her believe him, despite the impossibility of it. Virginia slipped back into the house undetected, changing quickly into one of Thomas's approved dresses before he returned home. But the day had changed something fundamental within her. The seed of rebellion that had been planted weeks ago had taken root and begun to grow. Over the next month, Virginia outwardly played the role of the perfect banker's wife. She attended socials, learned to pour tea without spilling a drop, and spoke in the modulated tones Thomas preferred. But inside, she was making plans. She began setting aside small amounts of money from the household budget, hiding the coins in a tin beneath the loose floorboard where she kept Jack's letter. She studied Thomas's schedule, noting patterns and opportunities. And most importantly, she began to gather her courage. Virginia didn't see Jake during this time, though she heard from Martha, who gossiped with the other house staff, that the Jensen ranch foreman was seen regularly in town. She wondered if he was hoping to catch a glimpse of her, just as she found herself scanning the street whenever she was allowed out with Martha as chaperone. The opportunity Virginia had been waiting for came in early July, when Thomas announced he would be traveling to San Francisco for a banking conference. "I'll be gone for 6 days," he informed her over breakfast. "Mrs. Potter has agreed to check in on you daily to ensure you're maintaining appropriate activities in my absence." Virginia nodded docilely, while her mind raced with possibilities. "I'll miss you, Thomas," she lied. Thomas looked pleased with her response. "You've made remarkable progress, Virginia. When I return, perhaps we can discuss starting a family. A child would give you proper focus for your energies." The thought of bringing a child into this suffocating household made Virginia's blood run cold, but she forced a smile. "As you wish." After Thomas departed on the morning stage, Virginia waited until Mrs. Potter made her obligatory visit, enduring an hour of the woman's patronizing conversation before claiming a headache and retiring to her room. Once she was certain Mrs. Potter had left, Virginia moved quickly. She changed into her simplest dress, packed a small bag with only essential items, and retrieved her saved money from its hiding place. Then she sat down at Thomas's writing desk and penned a letter. "Thomas," she wrote, "by the time you return, I will be gone. I cannot continue living as a shadow of myself to please you. You wanted to change everything about me, but I've finally realized that the person I am is worth preserving. I wish you well, but I cannot be your wife any longer." She signed it simply, Virginia. leaving behind the Worthington name along with everything else Thomas had tried to impose upon her. Virginia slipped out the back door, heart pounding, and made her way through town. She kept her head down, terrified of being recognized but determined to reach her destination. She didn't go to the stagecoach office or the train station, where she might be spotted. Instead, her feet carried her along the familiar road toward the Jensen ranch. The journey felt different this time, not a temporary escape, but a permanent one. Every step took her closer to freedom, closer to reclaiming herself. The sun was beginning to set when she finally spotted the ranch house in the distance, lights glowing warmly in the windows. Virginia hesitated at the edge of the property, suddenly overcome with doubt. What if Jack had just been being kind? What if there wasn't really a place for her here anymore? As she stood there, uncertain, a horse and rider approached from the direction of the barn. In the fading light, she recognized Jake's silhouette immediately. He reined in his horse when he spotted her, disbelief and then joy crossing his features. "Virginia, I left him," she said simply, her voice breaking slightly. "I couldn't do it anymore." Jake dismounted in one fluid motion, crossing the distance between them in long strides. Before she could explain further, he'd wrapped his arms around her in a firm embrace. "You're the bravest woman I know," he murmured against her hair. Virginia allowed herself to sink into his strength for a moment before pulling back. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "I just knew I had to leave." Jake's blue eyes were warm in the twilight. "What happens next is up to you, Virginia. For the first time in a long time, you get to decide." The truth of his words washed over her like a cleansing rain. She was free, terrifyingly, wonderfully free. "Let's start by telling your brother you're home," Jake suggested, picking up her small bag. "He's going to be mighty happy to see you." Virginia walked beside Jake toward the house, feeling as though she was returning not just to the ranch but to herself. Jack's face when he opened the door and saw her standing there was worth every moment of fear she'd experienced in leaving. "Ginny," he exclaimed, pulling her into a fierce hug. "You're here." "I left Thomas," she explained, stepping into the warm kitchen. "I couldn't be who he wanted me to be anymore." Jack's expression was a mixture of concern and approval. "Are you all right?" Virginia considered the question honestly. "Not entirely, but I will be." Jake set her bag down by the door. "I should leave you two to talk," he said, turning to go. "Stay," Virginia said quickly, surprising herself with the request. "Please, you're part of this too." Something passed between them, an understanding, a connection, as Jake nodded and took a seat at the kitchen table. Over cups of strong coffee, Virginia told them everything: the suffocating restrictions, the constant criticism, the gradual erasure of her identity. As she spoke, she felt the weight of months of repression lifting from her shoulders. "You can stay here as long as you want," Jack assured her. "Forever, if that's what you choose. This is your home." "Thomas won't let me go easily," Virginia warned, "when he returns and finds my letter." "Let him come," Jack said grimly. "I'd like to have a word with the man who tried to break my sister's spirit." "We'll handle whatever comes," Jake added, his steady gaze giving her strength. "You're not alone anymore." That night, Virginia slept in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the familiar creaks and sounds of the ranch house. For the first time in months, she dreamed not of escape but of possibility. The following days were a rediscovery of everything she'd been forced to abandon. Virginia rode horses again, the feel of the saddle beneath her and the wind in her hair bringing tears of joy to her eyes. She helped with ranch chores, her hands quickly regaining their familiar calluses that Thomas had so despised. And through it all, Jake was there teaching her about the changes to the ranch operations, riding beside her across the pastures, sharing quiet conversations under star-filled skies. Virginia found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his unwavering respect for who she was, his ability to make her laugh even as she worked through the pain of her failed marriage. "You never did tell me why you came west," she said to him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. Jake was silent for a moment. "I was engaged back in Colorado," he finally said, "to the daughter of a wealthy mine owner. I worked as a surveyor for her father." Virginia waited, sensing there was more to the story. "Elizabeth wanted me to take a position in her father's office," Jake continued. "She said a man of my intelligence was wasting his potential working outdoors." His smile was rueful. "Sound familiar?" Virginia nodded, understanding perfectly. "I tried for her sake. Wore suits, learned to talk business, attended society functions, but every day I felt less like myself." Jake looked at Virginia directly. "One morning I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back at me. That's when I knew I had to leave." "What did Elizabeth say?" Virginia asked softly. "She said I was throwing away my chance at a better life," Jake replied. "But it wasn't better, just different. She couldn't understand that I was proud of who I was, that I didn't need changing." Virginia reached out impulsively, placing her hand over his. "I understand." Jake turned his palm up, entwining their fingers. "I know you do, that's why." He hesitated, then continued, his voice low and intense. "That's why I couldn't stand seeing the same thing happening to you. From the moment I met you in that store, I saw someone struggling to hold onto herself in the face of another's expectations. You gave me the courage to leave," Virginia admitted, "when you said there was nothing about me that needed changing." "I meant it," Jake said firmly. "Virginia, you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known, just as you are." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Virginia was acutely aware of their joined hands, of the warmth of him beside her, of how natural it felt to be here with him. Before either could say more, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the moment. Jack rode up to the house, his expression grim. "Thomas Worthington is back from San Francisco," he announced without preamble. "He's at the sheriff's office claiming you've been abducted." Virginia's heart sank. Already? He wasn't due back for 3 more days. Apparently, he cut his trip short when a business associate mentioned seeing Jake driving you toward the ranch last month, Jack explained. "He's demanding the sheriff bring you back to town." Jake stood, his posture protective. "The sheriff can't force her to go anywhere. She's a grown woman who left of her own free will." "Sheriff Morgan knows that," Jack agreed. "He's stalling Thomas, but he sent word that we should expect him out here by morning to hear Virginia's side of the story." Virginia took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "Then I'll tell him the truth, all of it." That night, sleep eluded her as she prepared for the confrontation to come. Around midnight, a soft knock at her door revealed Jake, his expression concerned. "I couldn't sleep," he explained. "Wanted to make sure you were all right." Virginia opened the door wider, inviting him in. They sat by the window, talking in low voices about everything and nothing: childhood memories, favorite books, dreams for the future. Virginia found herself imagining a future with this man beside her, and the thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "What if Thomas convinces the sheriff to make me return?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. Jake's face was solemn in the moonlight. "Do you want to go back?" "Never," Virginia answered without hesitation. "Then we won't let that happen," Jake promised. "I'd take you away from here anywhere you wanted to go before I'd let him force you back into that life." The intensity of his declaration took her breath away. "You barely know me," she whispered. Jake reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know enough," he replied softly. "I know that you're brave and kind, that you love this land as much as I do, that when you laugh it feels like sunrise." His hand lingered against her cheek. "I know that since the moment I saw you in McCoy's store, I haven't been able to get you out of my mind." Virginia's heart thundered in her chest. She knew she should pull away. She was still legally married. After all, but something stronger than propriety held her there, leaning slightly into his touch. "Jake," she whispered, uncertain what she wanted to say next. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, breaking the spell between them. Jake pulled back, standing quickly as Jack's voice called softly through the door. "Ginny, you still awake?" "Yes," she answered, moving away from Jake. "Come in." Jack entered, looking between them with a raised eyebrow but saying nothing about finding Jake in his sister's room at midnight. "Just wanted to let you know I rode out to the Wilkins place. Phil's agreed to come by tomorrow as a witness to how Thomas treated you in town." "Thank you," Virginia said gratefully. As Jake excused himself, his eyes met Virginia's with an unspoken promise. "We'll finish this conversation later." Morning brought Sheriff Morgan to the ranch, his expression apologetic as he dismounted. "Miss Virginia," he greeted her, deliberately using her maiden name, "your husband's making quite a commotion in town." Virginia stood straight, Jack on one side of her and Jake on the other. "He's not my husband in any way that matters anymore, Sheriff." Sheriff Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "That may be so, but legally he still has certain rights. He's claiming you're unwell, that you need to be returned to his care." Virginia felt a chill run through her. "I'm perfectly well, as you can see. I left Thomas because he was trying to change everything about me, who I am, how I speak, even how I think." The sheriff studied her for a moment. "Did he ever harm you, Miss Virginia? Physically, I mean." Virginia hesitated. "No, not physically." "But there are other ways to harm a person, Sheriff." Before Morgan could respond, the sound of an approaching carriage drew their attention. Thomas had arrived, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, his face tight with anger. "Virginia," he called as he leapt from the carriage. "Thank God you're safe. These men have taken advantage of your vulnerable state." Virginia stepped forward, putting herself between Thomas and the men she trusted. "No one has taken advantage of me, Thomas. I left you of my own free will, as my letter explained." Thomas's expression darkened. "A letter clearly written under duress. Come now, Virginia, this foolishness has gone on long enough. It's time to come home." "I am home," Virginia replied firmly. Thomas looked past her to Jake, his eyes narrowing. You're the one who's been poisoning my wife's mind." Jake remained calm. "I believe your wife's mind is her own, Mr. Worthington." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "How dare you speak to me that way? Sheriff, I demand you arrest this man for interfering in my marriage." Sheriff Morgan sighed. "Mr. Worthington, I can't arrest a man for talking to your wife." "Now, why don't we all calm down and discuss this reasonably?" But Thomas was beyond reason. "Virginia, get in the carriage, now." "No," the word was simple but powerful. "You are my wife," Thomas hissed. "You will do as I say." Virginia stood her ground. "I was also a person before I was your wife, Thomas. A person you've tried to erase. I won't let you do that anymore." Thomas lunged forward suddenly, grabbing Virginia's arm. Enough of this nonsense. In an instant, Jake was there, his hand closing around Thomas's wrist. "Let her go," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Thomas released his grip, turning to the sheriff. "You see how it is. She's being kept here against her will." Sheriff Morgan had seen enough. "Seems to me the only one trying to force anyone to do anything is you, Mr. Worthington. Miss Virginia has made her wishes clear." "This is outrageous," Thomas spluttered. "She is my wife." "And she's my sister," Jack interjected, "who has chosen to return to her family home." "There's no law against that." Thomas looked between them, his composure cracking. "Virginia, think about what you're doing. Everything I did was for your own good to help you become someone better." "There was nothing wrong with who I was," Virginia replied, finding strength in the truth of her words. "You never wanted a wife, Thomas. You wanted a project." Thomas's face contorted with rage. "After everything I've done for you, taken you from this primitive existence, given you position in society, this is how you repay me." "I never asked for any of that," Virginia said quietly. "I just wanted to be loved for who I am." Thomas scoffed. "Sentimental nonsense. Love is about improvement, about helping the other person reach their potential." Jake stepped forward. "No, sir. Love is about accepting someone exactly as they are, about seeing their true self and cherishing it, not trying to change it." The simple wisdom of Jake's words hung in the air. Thomas looked between Virginia and Jake, understanding dawning in his eyes. "So that's how it is," he said coldly. "You've left me for this, Cowboy." Virginia shook her head. "I left you for myself, Thomas, because I deserve to live as the person I truly am." Sheriff Morgan cleared his throat. "Mr. Worthington, I think it's best you return to town now. Miss Virginia is clearly here of her own accord, and I see no reason to intervene." "This isn't the end of this," Thomas warned, but his voice lacked conviction. The fight seemed to be draining out of him as he realized he'd lost control of the situation and of Virginia. "Actually, it is," Virginia replied calmly. "I'll be filing for divorce, Thomas. You deserve a wife who wants to be the person you're trying to create, and I deserve to be free." Thomas stared at her for a long moment, perhaps truly seeing her for the first time. Without another word, he turned and stalked back to his carriage. As the dust from his departure settled, Sheriff Morgan tipped his hat to Virginia. "You're a brave woman, Miss Jensen. Not many would have the courage to stand up for themselves that way." "I had help," Virginia replied, glancing at Jake with gratitude. After the sheriff left, promising to help with the legal process of the divorce, Virginia found herself alone with Jake by the corral fence. "Did you mean what you said?" she asked. "About love being about accepting someone as they are." Jake turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable. "Every word. Virginia, I know your life is complicated right now, and I have no right to add to that complication, but—" He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you. With exactly who you are." Virginia's heart soared at his words. "Even though I'm still legally married. Even though it might be months before the divorce is final, even so," Jake confirmed. "I don't expect anything from you, Virginia. I just wanted you to know that there's a man who sees you, truly sees you, and thinks you're perfect exactly as you are." Virginia stepped closer to him, the rightness of this moment, of this man, crystallizing in her mind. "What if I told you I'm falling in love with you too?" Jake's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then I'd say we have a lot of days ahead of us to figure things out, one step at a time." As the sun set over the Jensen ranch, Virginia stood beside the man who loved her for herself, feeling truly free for the first time in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Divorces never were, especially in small towns, but she faced it with courage and hope. Over the following months, Virginia reclaimed her life piece by piece. The divorce proceedings were difficult, with Thomas alternating between rage and attempts to win her back, but she remained firm in her decision. Sheriff Morgan proved to be an unexpected ally, testifying to Thomas's controlling behavior in court. Jake remained steadfast through it all, a constant support without pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that Virginia had never experienced before. When the divorce was finally granted in November of 1869, Virginia celebrated not with sadness but with relief. That evening, Jake took her riding to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. "I have something to ask you," he said as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Virginia's heart quickened. "What is it?" Jake took her hand. "I know you've just gained your freedom, and the last thing I want is to take that from you. But I love you, Virginia Jensen, exactly as you are, your strength, your spirit, your kindness. I don't want to change a single thing about you." He drew a small ring from his pocket, simple but beautiful. "Will you marry me? Not to become someone else, but to be yourself by my side." Tears of joy filled Virginia's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "because you've never asked me to be anyone but myself." They married in the spring of 1870, a simple ceremony on the Jensen ranch with Jack giving the bride away. Virginia wore a practical but beautiful dress of her own choosing, her hair in a simple style adorned with wildflowers. As years passed, Virginia and Jake built a life together that honored both their dreams. They eventually took over management of part of the Jensen ranch, building their own home on the property. Their first child, a son they named William after Virginia's father, was born in 1871, followed by a daughter, Emma. 2 years later, Virginia never lost her independent spirit. She continued to ride, to help with the ranch work, to speak her mind freely. And Jake never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was, a strong, capable woman whose natural grace needed no refinement. Sometimes, Virginia would see Thomas in town, remarried to a pliable young woman from San Francisco who embodied everything he had tried to make Virginia become. He would nod stiffly, and she would respond in kind, but there was no bitterness in her heart. She had found her true self and her true love, and for that, she could almost thank him. On their 10th anniversary, Jake presented Virginia with a handcrafted wooden box. Inside was a small collection of mementos, the peppermint stick wrapper from McCoy's store the day they first spoke, a pressed wildflower from their rides together, the ribbon from their wedding. "What's this for?" Virginia asked, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "To remind you of our journey," Jake replied. "And that from the first moment I saw you, I knew you were perfect just as you were." Virginia leaned into his embrace, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought this man into her life at exactly the moment she needed him most. "I love you, Jake Keegan." "And I love you, Virginia Keegan, exactly as you are," he replied, sealing his words with a kiss as the setting sun bathed their home in golden light. In their long life together, through joys and hardships, that promise remained unbroken, a love built not on changing each other, but on the freedom to be truly themselves.